Welcome back to In Conversation with our special guest, Douglas Brinkley, noted historian and best-selling author. President Eisenhower, I like Ike. I just got one of those buttons from his great-granddaughter for sending a modest contribution to the Eisenhower Library, but he was a hero of World War II, led the coalition, twice elected president against a very strong opponent, Adlai Stevenson, who was a great resume, but Ike just wiped him out.
Well, Eisenhower's having a great revisionism right now. People are thinking he's a much better president. It gets back to that when documents start coming out. We now see that he was very hands-on. Many people thought John Foster Dulles was running the foreign policy and Nixon, who was vice president, had a role. Now we're seeing Ike was the mastermind of everything. And it was a great decade, the 50s, of peace and prosperity. He pulled us out of Korea. And in response to something like Sputnik, when the Soviets looked like they were getting the edge in space, he founded NASA. Even his farewell address about the industrial military complex is becoming one of the big
prescient, really.
Precedent in so many ways. So Eisenhower is being admired by liberals today, which is astonishing.
And I give him credit for something that he didn't do. There was a lot of pressure to go in to bail the French out in Vietnam when they lost Bien Bien Phu, and he said, no, we don't want to get involved. He kept us out of what later became the Vietnam War.
Excellent point, and that's a big reason why I think a lot of the left of the anti-Vietnam War left is saying, look, Ike was smart enough. It really was Kennedy and Johnson's war, and certainly Nixon felt that. I've been listening to the Nixon tapes recently.
Oh, yes.
I'm doing a piece on them for Vanity Fair this summer, and it's remarkable how he's blaming Nixon, Kennedy, and Johnson. Look, I'm inheriting this Vietnam War, and Eisenhower never would have gotten us into this mess.
Yeah. And Johnson, after the Kennedy assassination, felt that he could not be the first Democrat to lose a war, and he got stuck in that. And I don't think his heart was in it, because his real passion was the Great Society. But he wasn't going to allow a Democrat to lose a war, and they kept doubling down until Walter Cronkite, who you most recently wrote a book on, and Cronkite finally said it's not working. And I think Johnson famously said, well, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the country.
Well, look, the Vietnam was such a difficult situation, and CBS News opened up a bureau in Vietnam. And so Morley Safer did a big story about our Marines that were the bad guys burning huts down, and Johnson got infuriated by this, and so you started getting the media being critical of Vietnam. But in 1968, when Cronkite had enough, was when the Tet Offensive came, and it showed that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong still had a lot of fight in them, and so it ended up, Cronkite ended up playing quite a role that year. I noticed after, so the next year, 69, he had won all the Edward R. Murrow kind of awards for broadcasting.
This was your most recent book. Tell us why you chose to write a book on Walter Cronkite.
Well, you know, I meet a lot of people, and they say, oh, I remember the Kennedy assassination, as if they were there. What they remember is Walter Cronkite telling them about Kennedy's death, Cronkite covering Martin Luther King, Cronkite covering Vietnam. And his papers had just opened up at the University of Texas in Austin, and he was a voluminous pack rat kind of character, you know, so there was a lot of journals, photos, diaries, and all. And then it was so visual, I almost wanted to do the book as a kind of an online book, because you can use that footage and all. In a way, I just didn't have the resources to do that sort of thing. And also, I had known Cronkite a little bit, and that generation that were getting elderly, and I got to interview a lot of people. I mentioned Morley Safer, but a whole group of people like Andy Rooney was his best friend in World War II. He's gone now, but I got to interview them just in the nick of time.
And Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. And CBS then was the blue chip network. CBS News towered over everything, unlimited budget. 60 Minutes was riding high, and this was the place to be, and Walter Cronkite was the man.
Well, that's right, Art. And I argue in the book that when Cronkite starts on television in 1950, and then he steps down as anchor in 1981, that was the real time when CBS just dominated. I mean, because some places only got NBC and CBS, and some rural areas only got CBS. ABC was just a little upstart. When Cronkite leaves in '81, it almost exactly coincides with the internet revolution in journalism and cable TV news. So I doubt ever again there'll be like this Cronkite-like figure that everybody turns into. I mentioned Kennedy being killed. Well, a lot of countries, when a president of the United States gets their head blown off and their brains in the lap of his wife in such a heinous moment, there'll be riots in the street. In America, we all turned on Cronkite, who became like a pastor or a rabbi or grief counselor as well as a journalist.
Well, I can remember vividly to this moment exactly what I was doing when I heard the news, and then watching for 3 days nonstop. This was before 24-hour news cycles, and it was CBS I was
He
watching.
became like the Iron Man because he'd keep going on, and it wasn't just reporting like he did that, you know, president's been shot in Dallas and then Kennedy's death, but who killed Kennedy? Then who is Lee Harvey Oswald? Who's Jack Ruby? Where is the First Lady? Has there been an autopsy? Where's Kennedy going to be buried? Hyannisport or Arlington? What world leaders are coming? What's happening to the Kennedy kids? On and on and on. And everybody leaned forward, the whole country, to find out the drama and the tragedy of that November of 1963.
And the awesome solemnness and in a strange way, the beauty of that funeral procession and the respect and the horse without the rider and the carriage. Jackie planned it, and I think she modeled it after Lincoln.
It was done by her with grace and in a flawless way, like you suggest. I think there are these 50th anniversaries we're all hitting now.
Yes.
And those are a big marker. So we had 50 years of Kennedy's assassination. And in 2014, it's really 50 years of the Civil Rights Act of Lyndon Johnson. But it's not, the next big one is going to be Martin Luther King, 50 years of his death, and Bobby Kennedy's death, 68 in 2018. But then Neil Armstrong going to the moon. And I think the moon shot was the other time besides Kennedy assassination when everybody just sort of tuned into an event.
That was in 1969, I think, and we were watching it in July, One Step for Mankind, and a lot of people didn't believe we actually got to the moon. They thought it was a TV studio. There was a movie out with that thesis, and yet we haven't, well, we have gone past it, but there was a bit of a slowdown in the space program.
A huge slowdown, because once we at Apollo 11 went and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did the walk, then others started going, and people said, it's another moonwalk. It hurt NASA a great deal. Then you had the Challenger disaster.
Yes.
Now we're kind of broke, and NASA's getting crippled all the time, and China is moving so quickly into space, and we were trying to work with Russia for a while. So it's kind of open if a president would step up, and maybe the United States and China engage on going to Mars. All of the former astronauts that are still alive are advocating Mars exploration, not just to go to Mars, but by trying to, all these new technologies get developed.
And if China becomes more prominent in our foreign policy, here in Long Beach we have a world-class port, and we do already significant trading with China. That can only be very economically beneficial.
Well, I was mentioning the Nixon tapes, and for all of his foul language and Watergate and all, there are these brilliant parts of the tapes when he's being a global strategist, and he's saying by the mid-21st century, there are going to be two superpowers, the United States and China, and we better face it now. And there is some goodwill between the United States and China. I mean, if you go back to the 1890s when all of Europe and everybody was trying to cut up China, the United States called for the territorial integrity of China. So I recently was in Sunnylands in Palm Springs.
I've been there.
I had never gone. I brought my wife and kids to see really the desert garden there. But busloads of people from China were going, so friendly and so glad to meet Americans. You don't feel Russians coming over here greeting you with that kind of warmth. So there may be something that we can really develop. We better in the next decades.
And Nixon, to his great credit, no matter what you view his ultimate presidency, did the opening with Kissinger to China. And only a devout anti-communist like Nixon could have dared take that risk.
That was the big point. Yeah, he had the anti-communist credentials to do it, and that was a big game changer in 1972. And he really was able to do business with Mao and Zhou Enlai, And that legacy of Nixon in China, I think, is going to look bigger in history as as Watergate gets more remote and looks like a nickel and dime burglary.
Let me ask you, as we come to the end of this wonderful half hour together, looking into the future, what challenge do you think we are going to face and our next president or presidents are going to have to face that we're not really yet anticipating?
Well, I'm just not quite sure, and none of us are, how to grab climate change by the scruff of the neck. But are we really dealing with the time of a lot of increased disasters, more drought, more hurricanes? I mean, President Obama, who has all the NASA and NOAA and all this information, is connected connected Sandy and the smashing of New York to climate change. That climate issue is one I think we're going to have to find out whether people move inland a little bit. Are there going to be zones? And it may be that water becomes the new oil, and that you'll see in the coming 50 years more people moving to the Great Lakes region.
Well, they say they fight over gold, but they kill over water. Water is, and of course here in Los Angeles, without the aqueduct system and everything, no LA.
That's right, and you got it. And I have a feeling we'll be able to always have pipelines for water in some degrees, but nevertheless, I'm very bullish about the United States because of our northern border with Canada. And if you look at the natural resources the United States and Canada share, including the Great Lakes and all that fresh water, we're big players in the 21st century.
Well, on that positive note, Doug Brinkley, thank you so much for joining us here on In Conversation.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Okay, and thank you at home for being our guest. This is Art Levine saying goodnight from the campus of California State University, Long Beach.
Straight Talk has been brought to you by the Port of Long Beach, the Press Telegram, and Scan Health Plan. And remember, Straight Talk is viewable 24/7 at straighttalktv.com.